I never imagined that my life would turn out this way. Growing up in an orphanage, I thought I had already faced the worst that life could offer. Abandoned by my parents, left to fend for myself among other forgotten souls, I found solace only in a few of my childhood companions, especially Ethan. We were inseparable back then. Ethan, with his confident swagger, always found ways to make me smile, even when the days were bleak. Back then, he was my whole world, and I was foolish enough to believe that he would always be that for me. But things change. We left the orphanage together, hand in hand, ready to face the world. A year later, we were married. I thought I had found happiness, someone who understood my past, someone who had lived the same struggles. But soon after, I realized I was wrong. Ethan's love was fleeting. What began as tenderness quickly turned into indifference, and then something worse. I became more like his servant than his wife. Every morning, I woke early, cooked his meals, and kept the house spotless. He rarely spoke to me beyond giving orders, as if I were another object in his life, something to be owned and controlled. "Sarah," he said one morning, not even looking up from his breakfast, "I'm going out tonight. Don't wait up." His words stung, but they were nothing new. I had grown used to his coldness, to the way he ignored me. I didn't ask where he was going, I already knew he wouldn't tell me. Instead, I nodded and focused on scrubbing the kitchen counters, the scent of burnt toast lingering in the air. It wasn't long after our marriage that I noticed Monica slipping back into our lives. Monica, who had also grown up with us in the orphanage, had always been jealous of me. Even back then, I could feel her resentment simmering beneath the surface. She was beautiful, yes, with her sharp green eyes and raven black hair, but her beauty hid a wickedness that I had never understood until now. I didn't want to believe it at first, the way Ethan and Monica would share secretive glances when they thought I wasn't looking. But soon, the truth was too clear to ignore. They were lovers. It was on a rainy afternoon when the pieces finally fell into place. Ethan had left his phone on the kitchen table, something he rarely did. I shouldn't have looked, but the temptation was too strong. One message from Monica was all it took. Asterisk, "I can't wait to see you tonight. She doesn't suspect a thing." Asterisk. My hands shook as I read those words. I wanted to scream, to confront Ethan right then and there, but the pain in my chest held me back. Instead, I stayed silent, letting the weight of their betrayal settle in my bones. The next few weeks were unbearable. Ethan continued to treat me like a ghost in my own home, while Monica's presence seemed to grow more and more suffocating. She would show up unannounced, her laughter echoing through the house as if she belonged there. Days turned into weeks, and I noticed the coldness in Ethan growing stronger with each passing moment. He hardly spoke to me anymore, unless it was to complain or bark a command. It wasn't like this in the beginning. There was a time when Ethan looked at me with warmth in his eyes. I tried to convince myself it was the stress of his job, the pressures of life, but deep down, I knew better. One evening, as I placed dinner on the table, Ethan entered the room, his eyes fixed on his phone. "I'm going out tonight," he muttered without glancing at me, already heading toward the door. I wiped my hands on my apron, my heart sinking, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "You're going out again? You've been out nearly every night this week." He paused at the doorway, finally looking up, his expression hard. "What's your point, Sarah? I work all day to provide for us. Can't I have a little time to myself?" I swallowed hard. "It's just, we never spend time together anymore." Ethan scoffed, slipping his jacket over his broad shoulders. "Stop being so dramatic. You're here to cook, clean, and keep the house in order. That's your role. I have mine." His words stung, but I bit my tongue, knowing any further argument would only lead to a fight. He left without another word, the door slamming shut behind him, and I was left standing alone in the kitchen, the smell of roast chicken filling the empty space. That night, as I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to us. Where had things gone wrong? I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around myself. The bed felt impossibly large and cold without him beside me. The next day, Monica came over. Her visits had become more frequent lately, much to my discomfort. She would always show up unannounced, her lipstick a little too bright, her laughter a little too loud. She had always been bold, even back in the orphanage, but now there was something sinister about her presence. "Ethan's not here," I said as soon as I opened the door to find her standing there, looking smug as ever. Monica pushed past me, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm not here for Ethan. I wanted to see how you're doing. You look tired, Sarah." Her voice dripped with false concern, and I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to slam the door in her face. "I'm fine," I replied tersely, following her into the living room. She sat down on the couch, crossing her legs with an elegance that made me feel small and awkward. Her eyes swept around the room, taking in every detail as if she were assessing her kingdom. "I've been hearing a lot about Ethan lately," she said casually, as if the topic hadn't been carefully chosen to wound me. "He's quite the charmer at the office, isn't he? Always so admired by the women there." My stomach churned. I knew exactly what she was doing, planting seeds of doubt, making me question everything. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "Ethan's busy with work," I said, forcing a smile. "He's always been focused on his career." Monica raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, I'm sure he is. Focused on all the right things." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and I busied myself with arranging the cushions on the couch, my hands shaking slightly. Monica had always been good at getting under my skin. I didn't trust her, not even for a second. But I hadn't yet gathered the courage to confront the growing suspicion that gnawed at me every time she and Ethan exchanged a glance. A few weeks later, everything changed. It was a Saturday evening, and Ethan had once again gone out, telling me he was meeting a friend from work. As I sat in the quiet house, flipping through old photo albums, memories of our early days together flooded my mind. We had been so happy once, so full of hope and dreams. But now, I barely recognized the man he had become. The sound of Ethan's phone vibrating on the kitchen counter snapped me out of my thoughts. He had left it behind again. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart racing. Something inside me, something raw and desperate, urged me to pick it up. I knew I shouldn't invade his privacy, but there was a part of me that needed answers. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the screen. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the string of messages from Monica. Monica, when are you coming? I've been waiting all day. Monica, don't keep me waiting too long, you know how impatient I can be.
Wink.
Monica, she still doesn't know, does she? Poor thing. Ethan, Sarah's useful. She cooks, cleans, and doesn't ask questions. She's nothing more than an accessory at this point. My vision blurred as I read the words. My hands shook uncontrollably, and I dropped the phone, its screen flickering as it hit the floor. It was true. Everything I had been denying for so long was true. Ethan and Monica had been having an affair right under my nose. The walls of the house seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with the weight of their betrayal. I sank to the floor, pressing my palms against my eyes, trying to block out the images flooding my mind. Ethan and Monica, laughing together, whispering in secret, sharing moments that I should have been a part of. For years, I had been blind. I had convinced myself that Ethan was just going through a phase, that our love could be rekindled. But now I knew the truth. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up on the cold kitchen floor, but when I finally stood, something had changed within me. I was done being the obedient, silent wife. I deserved better than this. The door creaked open as Ethan returned, smelling faintly of cologne and alcohol. He glanced at me, sitting stiffly at the dining table, but didn't seem to notice the tension in the air. He walked past me, loosening his tie, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. Ethan paused, his back to me. "Out," he said, as if that was answer enough. "With Monica?" I added, my heart pounding. He froze, his hands dropping to his sides. Slowly, he turned to face me, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "I saw your messages," I said, standing up, my hands clenched into fists. Don't lie to me, Ethan. I know everything. For a moment, he looked as if he might deny it, but then his expression changed, hardening into something cold and unapologetic. So what if you do? He spat. What are you going to do about it? His words hit me like a slap in the face. There was no remorse, no guilt, just arrogance. He didn't even care that I knew. To him, I was just an inconvenience. I'm leaving, I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. I'm done being your servant, your accessory. You can have Monica, but you'll never have me again. I showed him the papers. I want a divorce. Please sign the paper right here right now, and I promise you I will not demand alimony. Ethan laughed bitterly. And where will you go, Sarah? You want me to sign a papers? Here we go. He signed them without hesitation. You will return to me eventually. You've got nothing. No one. But he was wrong. I had myself, and that was enough. The day I walked out of Ethan's house was the day I took my life back. For years, I had let him control me, define me. But now, I was free. I moved to a small town far from the suffocating memories of Ethan and Monica, determined to rebuild my life from the ground up. It wasn't easy at first. I took on odd jobs, working in a local bakery, cleaning houses, anything to keep myself going. But every day that passed, I felt stronger, more alive. And then, I met Daniel. He was nothing like Ethan. Where Ethan had been cold and distant, Daniel was warm and attentive. He saw me, not as a servant or a possession, but as a partner. We would spend hours talking, sharing our hopes and dreams, laughing until our sides hurt. With him, I rediscovered the parts of myself I had long forgotten. One evening, as we walked along the riverbank, Daniel took my hand in his eyes filled with a tenderness that made my heart swell. Sarah, he said softly, I love you. And I want to build a future with you. Tears filled my eyes as I smiled up at him, feeling a warmth I hadn't known in years. I love you too, Daniel. After I left, from what's a mutual friend who knows Monica and Ethan and a kind neighbor told me it didn't take long for Ethan's life to unravel. At first, he barely noticed my absence. He had Monica, after all, and he thought that would be enough. But slowly, the cracks in his perfect world began to show. Without me there to clean the house, cook his meals, and tend to every detail of his life, the chaos began to creep in. The laundry piled up, the dishes stayed dirty, and the once pristine home we had shared became a mess. But it wasn't just the house. Ethan had always relied on me for emotional stability, even if he didn't realize it. Now, without my calming presence, his temper grew shorter and his patience thinner. One evening, after another exhausting day at the office, he came home to find Monica sprawled on the couch, flicking through television channels, clearly unconcerned with the state of the house. He stood in the doorway, surveying the disaster that had become his life, dishes left unwashed, clothes tossed haphazardly, and Monica lounging around as if she were the queen of a crumbling kingdom. Can't you clean up around here? He snapped, tossing his jacket onto a chair. Monica barely glanced up. Why should I? That was Sarah's job, wasn't it? Ethan's jaw clenched. Sarah's gone. You live here now, don't you? The least you could do is help out. Monica laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Help out? I'm not your maid, Ethan. A sharp silence fell between them. Ethan realized, too late, that Monica was not the replacement for Sarah he had thought she would be. While Sarah had been quiet, dutiful, and willing to shoulder all the responsibilities, Monica was selfish and reckless, always thinking only of herself. The fantasy he had built up in his mind, of living happily ever after with Monica, was starting to crack. Monica, too, began to realize that her life with Ethan wasn't the glamorous affair she had imagined. At first, it had been exciting, sneaking around behind Sarah's back, the thrill of having something forbidden. But now that Sarah was gone, the excitement had faded, replaced by the harsh reality of day-to-day life with Ethan. She quickly grew bored. Ethan was not the man she had fantasized about. He was controlling, demanding, and often absent, spending long hours at work and coming home in a foul mood. The passionate spark between them fizzled out, leaving nothing but frustration in its place. One night, after yet another argument about the state of the house, Monica stormed out of the apartment, needing to clear her head. She wandered the streets, wondering how her life had turned into this. She had always imagined herself as someone destined for more than just being a man's lover, more than just living in the shadow of another woman. As she stood on a street corner, watching the traffic rush by, she realized with a jolt that she missed something she never thought she'd admit. She missed the rivalry with Sarah. With Sarah gone, there was no one left to compete with, no one left to make her feel superior. She had one, but at what cost? Ethan's life continued to spiral downward, but the worst was yet to come. For years, he had been respected at his job, known for his sharp mind and his ability to get things done. But as his personal life fell apart, so did his professional life. Without the support system Sarah had provided, Ethan's performance at work began to suffer. He was late to meetings, missed deadlines, and snapped at his colleagues. His once stellar reputation started to crumble, and whispers spread through the office about his declining behavior. The final blow came one fateful afternoon when Ethan was called into his boss's office. He sat there, a cold sweat forming on his brow as his supervisor, Mr. Hargrove, stared at him with disappointment. "Ethan, you've been with this company for a long time," Mr. Hargrove began, his voice calm but firm. "But lately, your performance has been unacceptable. You've missed important meetings, your work has been sloppy, and I've received numerous complaints about your attitude." Ethan opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came. He knew it was true. The chaos in his personal life had seeped into his professional one, and there was no one left to help him clean up the mess. "I'm afraid we have no choice but to let you go," Mr. Hargrove said, the words falling like a hammer. Ethan sat there in stunned silence, his heart pounding in his chest. His job, his last shred of control, was gone. As Ethan's career crumbled, so did his relationship with Monica. She had tolerated his moods and the decline of their life together for as long as she could, but now that he had lost his job, things took a turn for the worse. One night, after Ethan came home drunk and angry from another failed attempt to find work, Monica had had enough. "Get out," she spat, pushing him away as he tried to collapse onto the couch. "What are you talking about?" Ethan slurred, blinking at her through bleary eyes. "I said get out, Ethan," Monica shouted, her face twisted with disgust. "I'm done with you. You're a loser, you've lost your job, your house is a dump, and frankly, I can't stand looking at you anymore." Ethan stood there, stunned by her words. For the first time, he realized that Monica, the woman he had thrown everything away for, didn't care about him at all. She had used him, just like he had used her. "You can't kick me out," Ethan mumbled, though he could feel the truth sinking in. "This is my house." "Not anymore," Monica sneered. "I've already found someone else. Someone who can actually provide for me." Ethan's heart sank as he realized what was happening. Monica had moved on, just like that. She had used him, taken what she wanted, and now she was leaving him behind. Ethan's fall from grace was swift and brutal. With no job, no home, and no one left to turn to, he found himself wandering the streets, lost and broken. "The man who had once held so much power over me now had nothing. He was a shell of the man he used to be." He tried reaching out to old friends, but no one wanted to help. His arrogance and cruelty had alienated everyone, leaving him isolated in his misery. The weight of his actions finally caught up to him, and for the first time, he felt the full impact of his betrayal, not just to me, but to himself. Monica's life, too, began to crumble. The new man she had latched onto wasn't as kind or as forgiving as she had hoped. He quickly grew tired of her manipulations and discarded her just as easily as she had discarded Ethan. Alone, with no real friends or allies, Monica drifted from one toxic relationship to another, always searching for something that would never come. She had won Ethan's affection, only to find that victory meant nothing. The joy of their secret affair had been fleeting, and now all that remained was bitterness and regret. Years passed, and while I thrived in my new life with Daniel and our daughter, Ethan and Monica's lives spiraled further into despair. Ethan was last seen in a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town, drinking away what little money he had left. His once sharp features were gaunt, his eyes hollow, and the charm he had once possessed was long gone. Monica, too, had fallen far from the life she had once envisioned for herself. She bounced from job to job, never able to settle, her beauty fading along with her prospects. The envy and hatred that had driven her for so long consumed her, leaving her a shadow of the woman she once was. In the end, they were left with nothing but the consequences of their choices. While I had found love, family, and happiness, they were trapped in the misery they had created for themselves. And that, perhaps, was the greatest justice of all. Absolutely. Let's add a section where Ethan, in his desperation, tries to reconcile with Sarah, only to discover she's moved on and is happily married. Months had passed since Ethan's life had fallen apart. With no job, no friends, and no Monica to manipulate his life, the loneliness began to gnaw at him. The alcohol he used to dull the pain no longer provided the comfort it once had, and for the first time in years, he found himself thinking about Sarah. She had always been there for him, quietly supporting him even when he had treated her like a servant. Looking back now, Ethan realized how much he had taken her for granted. The stability, the love, the warmth, Sarah had provided all of that. And in his arrogance, he had thrown it all away. Sitting in his dingy apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his once successful life, a thought crept into his mind, maybe I can get her back. He had heard rumors, whispers from old acquaintances, that Sarah had left town after their breakup. No one knew where she had gone or what she was doing now, but Ethan clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she was still out there, waiting for him to come to his senses. One morning, after a sleepless night of wrestling with his regrets, Ethan made a decision. He would find Sarah, apologize, and try to make things right. He convinced himself that if he could just talk to her, she would understand. Maybe she would even take him back. Ethan's search for Sarah was harder than he expected. He visited the old places they used to go, the coffee shop where they would sit for hours, the park where they had once walked hand in hand, but Sarah was nowhere to be found. He even went to the orphanage where they had grown up together, hoping to find some clue, but the building had long since been abandoned. Frustrated but determined, Ethan began asking around, tracking down mutual acquaintances, hoping someone knew where she had gone. Eventually, he found someone, a former coworker of Sarah's, who mentioned that she had moved to a small town far from the city. With this new information in hand, Ethan gathered the little money he had left and made his way to the town, his heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and hope. He imagined what he would say to her, how he would apologize for everything, how he would promise to be a better man. In his mind, he replayed the moment over and over again, Sarah forgiving him, welcoming him back, and their lives falling back into place. When Ethan finally arrived in the small town, it felt like a world away from the life he had once known. The streets were quiet, lined with trees and modest homes. It was nothing like the fast-paced city life they had shared, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder if Sarah had found peace here, peace that he had never been able to give her. After asking around, Ethan eventually found out where Sarah lived. His heart raced as he approached the small, charming house on the edge of town. It was modest but well kept, with a garden blooming in front and a white picket fence surrounding it. As he stood there, looking at the house, he felt a strange sense of nervousness. This was it, the moment he would finally see her again. Taking a deep breath, he walked up to the door and knocked. His palms were sweaty, and his heart pounded in his chest as he waited. For a long moment, there was no answer. He was about to knock again when the door opened. And there she was. Sarah stood in the doorway, looking more radiant than he had ever seen her. Her hair was longer now, and there was a lightness in her expression that had been absent for years. For a brief second, Ethan's heart leapt, maybe she hadn't moved on, maybe she was still waiting for him. But then, he saw the small child in her arms, a little girl, with bright eyes and curly hair. The girl clung to Sarah, hiding her face in her mother's shoulder, and Sarah smiled gently, stroking her daughter's hair. "Ethan?" Sarah's voice was calm, but there was a hint of surprise in her eyes. She hadn't expected to see him again. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Sarah, I've been looking for you. I made a mistake. I know I did. I should have never." He stopped himself, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I want to fix things. I want to make it right." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she shifted her daughter in her arms, her gaze softening with sympathy but not with love. "Ethan," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "that part of my life is over. I've moved on." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Ethan blinked, his mind reeling. Moved on? But we were together for so long. We can fix it. I can be different, I promise. But before Sarah could respond, a tall figure appeared behind her in the doorway. Daniel. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder, and looked at Ethan with quiet strength. It was clear from the way Daniel stood, his arm protective around Sarah, that this was her new life, her new family. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Sarah said, her voice kind but resolute. "I'm married now. I've found happiness here, with Daniel and our daughter. I wish you well, but there's no place for you in my life anymore." Ethan's heart shattered as the reality of the situation sank in. He had come here hoping to win her back, but she had already moved on, far beyond him. She was happy, and for the first time, Ethan understood that he had never truly made her happy. He had only brought her pain. Ethan stood there, unable to speak, as Sarah gently closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut echoed in his ears, final and unforgiving. He had lost her, completely and utterly lost her. He stumbled back from the house, his legs shaking, his vision blurring with tears. The weight of his mistakes crashed down on him all at once. He had betrayed the one person who had ever truly cared for him, and now, there was no going back. Sarah had built a new life, a better life, and there was no place for him in it. As Ethan wandered aimlessly through the streets of the small town, the realization settled deep within him, he had no one left. His arrogance, his selfishness, had driven away the only person who had ever loved him unconditionally. Now, he was truly alone. He returned to his crumbling life, but it wasn't the same. The house felt emptier than ever, the alcohol no longer numbed the pain, and the echoes of his past haunted him relentlessly. Every day, he was reminded of the life he could have had with Sarah, if only he had been a better man. Meanwhile, Monica's life had taken a turn for the worse as well. After she had left Ethan, she bounced from one bad relationship to another, always searching for someone to provide the luxury and excitement she craved. But as time went on, her charm faded, and her looks, once her greatest asset, began to lose their power. She found herself trapped in a toxic relationship with a man who treated her even worse than Ethan had. He was controlling, possessive, and verbally abusive, but Monica stayed, clinging to the illusion that things would get better. But they never did. One day, as she sat alone in a dingy apartment, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror, Monica realized that she had wasted her life chasing after things that never truly mattered. She had betrayed Sarah, broken up her marriage, and for what? A fleeting affair with a man who never loved her. Monica's beauty had faded, her prospects had dried up, and now, like Ethan, she was alone, left to face the consequences of her choices. Ethan and Monica, once so arrogant and full of ambition, were now trapped in the misery of their own making. Their betrayals had led them down a path of loneliness, regret, and despair. They had sought happiness at the expense of others, but in the end, it was Sarah who found true happiness. Sarah, meanwhile, thrived. She had built a life of love and joy with Daniel, raising their daughter in the warmth of a family built on trust and respect. She no longer thought of Ethan or Monica, her past was behind her, and her future was filled with hope. And so, as Ethan and Monica withered away, consumed by the bitterness of their own mistakes, Sarah lived the life they could only dream of, happy, fulfilled, and finally free.